All right, so I want to now introduce Ann Warner with Planning and Development Services with the City of Tucson. Ann, thank you so much for joining us. I know there's been a lot of interest in hearing you speak. And Ann has a very interesting background, so I wanted to just introduce you to her before she gets started. Ann is a U of A alum before CAPLA existed. She started her career doing large projects such as Rita Ranch, La Paloma, the CAP water treatment plant, and she did that for 8 years before she switched to planning, rezoning, and code compliance, which she did for 15 years. She was a partner at Planning Resources, which then sold to the Planning Center. But then she left to work for a developer in 2005, took a little break during the recession, and then she worked for the Pima County Assessor's Office for 5 years. And then she was an elementary teacher out in 3 Points for another 5 years. And then she joined the City of Tucson landscape section in May of 2021. So she's pretty new with the city. And I know some of you have already gotten a chance to work with her. So Ann, take it away.
Thanks, Alex. I'm glad everybody's here today. There's so many people that I don't know. There's only a handful of people that I've knew in my past life, like 30 years ago when I was, well, 10 years ago when I was working for Planning Resources. It was, first of all, can everybody see my screen or not? Am I still sharing? You can see it, Choya? Good. All right. Let's just go to the next slide. So is it anybody that has submitted plans in the recent, well, since I started, which just happened in May, there has been a big change in terms of how plans are reviewed in the landscape, water harvesting, and the native plant preservation ordinance. And how I got in this position was kind of happenstance, really. I had joined the city in March last year and was working as a plan reviewer. And then the person that was reviewing plans, then Andy Connor, suddenly passed away in May after a brief illness, not COVID related. But I was asked to take over. Just like one day I was not the reviewer, and the next day I was the reviewer. So it's taken me a few months to get comfortable about how I'm reviewing and my philosophy of what I'm reviewing, which is markedly different than how things were reviewed before. So the landscape review position for the City of Tucson was historically held by a planner. And now that it's changed to a landscape architect, I have a different perspective. I look at things much differently than planners because I was trained really differently and did different projects. So fortunately, I have also worked for a developer, and been in private practice, and now I'm working on the other side with City of Tucson reviewing. So I know what it feels like. I know what I'm doing to you, for sure. This also came about because the mayor and council is now looking hard at ways to reduce the impacts of climate change. The first thing that's on the radar is the water harvesting. So that is being scrutinized. I think the biggest change for me personally in this position is that I'm looking at the ordinances very holistically. And engineering section and the landscape section are now having conversations on a daily basis about what the ordinance means, what we are expecting to see. And I guess that hasn't happened before. So those are the big overall changes. We're also working with a code that is 30 plus years old. The LUC came around in 1995. It changed to the UDC in 2013. Didn't substantially change in all of the landscape sections of the code. Pretty much the same. I think that the parking ratio went down, and that's about the only one I can find besides the addition of the water harvesting ordinance. So how I started looking at the code was I look at the intent and purpose of each section to guide me. That's what I'm looking at first. And I don't know, this link here, I don't know if it'll work. I'm afraid to touch it to see what would happen. But anyway, it's a link to the code that just shows you an example of the purpose and intent of different sections. Some of them have an intent, some of them don't, some have both, but that's what I'm looking at first. And then I'm looking at the section, the items underneath as support for the intent and purpose. And when I'm looking at your plans, I'm looking at, does it make sense in the context of your site? And does what I'm deciding and what you're doing contribute to the health, safety, and welfare of the community? And am I being fair and consistent? And are my reviews aligning with the code? And then, I'm always looking if your plans are conflicting at all in those. And I think the way that it was interpreted before was more of a checklist rather than an intent and purpose. So yeah, there's going to be 10-foot landscape borders, but I'm also amenable to taking an average, let's say, or doing something more creative that aligns with the constraints of your site. So I think that may be a little different too than what you are used to. This is an example of my comments here. And the first 3 you will see on every single review. And they are just a blanket statement supporting me for what I'm about to write to you. And it's always good for you to make sure that the zoning and engineering approvals are in place. Although right now that's a little difficult because engineering is pretty far behind. But that is just so all the base plans match. So if you see these front-loaded things, they're just always going to be there, so you can pretty much ignore them. So then I use a template that basically is right out of the code, like point by point. Have you, do you have like landscape borders? Do you have trees in your parking lots? But I just do a checklist and cut and paste all of it. So, and I say this because sometimes I make a mistake and leave in comments that aren't at all related to your site. Sometimes that happens. Most of the time I'm pretty good about it. But if it sounds like it doesn't relate, it probably doesn't. It's probably a mistake. So I just wanted you to know how I review. It's a template, cut and paste. The other thing I do, actually, this is probably not directed to you specifically, because I think most of you know how to draw plans, but it's surprising how many times I am looking at plans that have horrific graphic conflicts that I can't even read what's going on. So I want it needs to be, first of all, very, very clear of what you're trying to present. Because if I can do my review very quickly, that's good for you, because it'll get done fast. So use labels, make sure your legend makes sense. Make sure you identify all the lines and all the hatches on your plans. Then I don't have to go and search for it. And that takes a lot of time searching for it, especially if I'm dealing with a plan set that's like 120 pages long. So if you, the clearer you are on your plans, just from a drafting point of view, it's going to go a lot faster. So also, if you have any issues or questions, call me before you even get started, because a lot of it can be resolved just on over a quick phone call. I don't look at the notes in terms of you repeating the code back to me. I already know it. I'm assuming you know it. You don't have to put it on the plans. What I do want to see are things that are really specific to your site. Believe it or not, some of the, I've seen plans that have, because of my requirement of having shade over parking lots, I now see trees that are like drawn 40 feet to 60 feet wide. And I'm like, yeah, that's providing shade, but that's not going to be realistic for, I think, in 3 years, you've got to provide like, no, that's water harvesting. Sorry, getting it mixed up. Do it realistically. I mean, I know that spacing is important. I don't care if the plant, if your trees are 33 feet apart, that's just a guideline. That's a calculation. If you want to have them closer or further, that's up to you. The biggest thing is making sure that the plans that you are, the base plans that you're using match with the engineers. I can't tell you, I would say 90% of any water harvesting plans don't match with the engineers. And now that the engineers are on board, we're both saying the same thing. The drainage solution has to work together. So the engineers are going to now see comments that say exactly the same thing that I'm saying, which is new. That's really new. In terms of what I look for all the time, is your concept clear? Are your plans clear and readable? And are the inspectors that are going to be checking the installation, will they understand what's going on? I look and see what borders are required based on the zoning, adjacent zoning. Are you in a public right of way or not? Then I look at any parking areas. I make sure that you have shaded asphalt. And that probably means including trees into your parking lot. And that one requirement that says that all islands have to be, I think it's like 34 square feet. No, we can be more creative about getting trees into parking lots so they're shading asphalt. The purpose of the trees are to shade asphalt, people, and cars. So that's a really big difference, because I think that in the past, only one line of the code in that particular area was being adhered to, because I have been seeing that on a lot of plans, and I've seen like proving to me that all the trees are within 40 feet of a parking space. That doesn't tell me that it's being shaded at all. You can have something that a tree that is shading the planter area and still be within 40 feet. So the biggest overriding thing is it needs to shade asphalt. And I don't care if it's within 40 feet or not. It's one of the criteria, but it's not all of the criteria. Irrigation plans, I usually just look at backflow preventers, whether you've got a meter dedicated or you've got the sub-meter. I haven't seen any sub-meters. That's going to be a requirement because of the scrutiny on the water harvesting ordinance right now from mayor and council. So that is the really big push right now, is compliance with the water harvesting ordinance. And then that goes to the next one, that there's two things that happen in terms of water harvesting. One is the mayor and council is giving greater scrutiny. And the other thing is there's a new retention detention design manual that encourages people to do a different retention detention solution rather and just have one pit that's collecting all the water. That manual is recommending that you have a series of smaller basins, reducing the footprint of the greater retention and detention basin, and incorporate water harvesting. We're not there. I haven't seen one plan that I would say meets that criteria yet, but it's still new, and I know we're going to get there by working together. And as far as the NPPO, I've been seeing a lot of things that would have been prohibited went back in 2010, 8, 2005. And I'm going to steer the ship more towards compliance with that native plant preservation ordinance, especially with the highest resource values on site. So I'm going to be very tough on crossing washes or disturbing high resource value vegetation, unless you can give me a really, really good reason and an argument for doing so. So that's briefly what I look at when I look at your plans. The thing that I want you to take away from this is that you have an opportunity to be more creative with your concepts than previously. And I respect you as a professional and know that you know what you're doing. And if you can call me if you have issues, that's going to help both of us. And lastly, I really would like your feedback in terms of improving the code, improving maybe how I look at something, educating me. I've been out of the field for 10 years. Stuff's happened that I'm not aware of. So I'll need you to help me too. And now we can go to questions if you'd like.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anne. Before I start taking questions, I just want to ask, since you said that people could call you if they want to talk about their plans, could you leave your phone number and your email in the chat, please?
I am doing it as we speak.
Thank you. And then another resource that would be great if you could leave in the chat if you're able to access it quickly, and if it's already available, is the new retention detention manual that you mentioned. Could you also throw that link in the chat? Thanks.
Yep, I can. As soon as I find it, I'll throw it in there.
Okay, great.
I'm going, what's my phone number? I don't know.
Okay, do we have any questions from anyone? Please raise your hand if you've got a question. Okay, first one I see is from We Design Group. Go ahead and ask your question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Hey, so this is Nate at We Design Group, and we've worked together on a couple projects. Nice to see you, and thanks for the presentation. A quick question about, you were mentioning that you haven't seen landscape plans kind of match the civil engineering plans. Are you referring to matching graphically, or are you saying that some of our landscape features, for instance, water harvesting, should show up in their plans? Or
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, is that if you have curb inlets or any kind of features like that, they should be on the grading plans too.
okay.
Spot elevations should be on your plans, so I can see that you've depressed it, or, you know, provide me a detail or something like that. But yeah, we're not accepting engineers just giving us plans that don't match. They have to match.
Fair enough. Thank you.
No, I'm not.
You know how to play it.
You have to like guess the word. Yeah, I think I understand the concept. Yellow's the right letter.
Hey, Matt, you're unmuted.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, I didn't know you were on.
I know. I'm sorry.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Nothing
Nothing.
else?
I
We have-
thought for sure I was just gonna have like people throwing, I guess
did
you can't
too.
throw fruit at me or
Okay,
anything,
looks like
but-
we do have a question from Jerry. Go ahead, Jerry.
All right. Hey, this is Jerry with Logan Simpson. I just appreciate you setting up this meeting. One thing that we're starting to do, and it sounds like you're kind of on the same page, is just having a better narrative of the design on the sheets, kind of like saying, hey, this is our intent here. Is that helpful to just kind of narrate the design?
Only if you're approaching it from what constraints you're dealing with. I think that would be helpful. Because, but maybe that's more of a phone conversation too. I don't know that. I guess it would help. Try it out, see if it does. I mean, all this is pretty new.
Yeah,
especially to me.
I'll give you an example. We're working on a public facility project where, you know, there's not a lot of focus on landscape in the private areas that are screened.
Yeah.
So just kind of describing that, making sure that we're, you know, at least balancing it out with more high profile areas and having like, hey, this is the intent of the project. And I appreciate you allowing us to call you. So that's awesome.
Oh, yeah. No, I know that the sites are all different. And I also know the code should have changed over the last 30 years, but hasn't. So we don't do hedges anymore. And it's still in the code. So, I mean, there's just all sorts of things that don't make any sense now. But the having to actually modify the code is such an ugly, ugly process that I think that's why nobody's done it. Pima County hasn't done it at all, ever. Theirs is still in place from 1976. So, you know, we're not as bad, but still we're both bad. So that's why I think that me being flexible in what you're presenting and trying to do is a good way to go.
Oh, hey, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your question. Paige.
Thank you, Alex. It sounds like you guys are 20 years ahead of Pima. But are there
about that.
Well, versus 76 versus 30 years ago. I don't know. Anyway, is there an intention to update the
No,
UDC? No, okay.
no, not at all. No,
uh,
it's basically, this is what we get to deal with. So I don't think personally, since I've been in the profession practicing, I don't think it works. I don't think it ever has worked very well. And it keeps on getting worse because we're dealing with more infill projects. So it's a problem in so many ways. And I
Okay.
just posted the detention
Thank you.
manual in the chat.
I have another question. So something I've struggled with is meeting the 50% coverage for street landscape borders. It always feels like we're jamming in as insane amount of plants. And I'm wondering if there's flexibility around that
Yes.
requirement, because it feels like when you put the trees in there and then you try to get 50% coverage, it looks like it's almost 100% coverage, really. So what flexibility is there?
I would say I'm looking at, I guess I'd have to understand what the 50% coverage was intended to do. I'm not really sure, and that's going to require me to do research into how that was created. I mean, I know that, covering it with vegetation is provides less heat reflection.
Yeah.
But then you've got DG, so that doesn't work either. That's, hot.
Yeah.
So I am open to, like I said, I'm going to be flexible. I've talked with a landscape architect about looking at doing dry landscape, which would require no irrigation. I'm looking at anything that meets the intent and purpose of the ordinances.
Well, I really appreciate that, because I've tried to understand that too, the philosophy behind the 50%, because when you look at our context of the Sonoran Desert, there's not 50% coverage. So you're not honoring the context. And I feel like it is a dust and a cooling measure, but it's really hard to meet sometimes.
Yeah, and when you're doing plans in the city of Tucson, unless you're on the outskirts, drought tolerant plants are what you need to do, not necessarily native. I'm fine with native or near native, as long as they're drought tolerant. So don't feel like you have to replicate the Sonoran Desert, because you can't, unless you're doing a re-veg project. So, but yeah, I'm flexible. That's what I'm going to say.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paige. Okay, next up we have Tim Johnson.
Hi. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Alex, for putting this on. Appreciate it. I've got two questions. Ann, I'm not sure if you are able to provide any specifics or any information on Mayor and Council's session and their increased attention to the rainwater harvesting and what might be forthcoming from that. And then the second question, or really a comment, is understanding how difficult it might be to tackle the code and why it hasn't been done so far. I think everybody here would probably agree that it's needed and important for a number of reasons. One is that while this is very helpful, listening to how plans are being interpreted currently, in a number of years, that may not be the same case. It may not be the same person reviewing that. So having that codified, I think, will help us all. And looking at something that is maybe a little bit more flexible and performance-based. And I think there's some examples out there of cities and jurisdictions that have done that successfully in order to meet what is their vision and goal, as opposed to sort of bean counting and circle counting.
As far as the city is actually going to forevermore make this position held by a landscape architect. So at least if it's not me, it's going to be somebody in the profession, which I think is a huge change and one that I believed should have happened 30 years ago. So that gives me a little bit of comfort. And hopefully I'll train the next person too. As far as mayor and council on the water harvesting, the PDSD has been instructed to take a look at the obstacles that have prevented the water harvesting ordinance from being implemented. So that is going to require a study of how we review and how the inspectors are reviewing. So they want us to look at it very holistically and give mayor and council recommendations of how to make it work better. And so that would be approximately, the next report's going to be like in a month or 5 weeks, I think, is the next time it's going to be on the agenda. I'm not absolutely 100% sure of that, but that's the intent. And I know the intent is to also try to clean up some of the contradictions between water harvesting and other code sections. So, but that's a code requirement and not an overhaul, which is a completely different animal. Did I answer your questions?
Yeah.
Oh, also, if you want to see the code overhauled, tell your council person relentlessly. Get your friends to do it. So, I mean, that's how you affect change in the government. I can't do it. Any other questions?
Okay, yeah, it looks like we have one more question from Matt Smith.
Hey, Ann, thanks for the presentation. Just had a quick question, kind of touched on what Tim asked. Is there going to be any formal announcement or formal update going out with what you're looking for with water harvesting or some of your different viewpoints on parking lot coverage?
As far as parking lot coverage, no. I'm just applying the code. That's all I'm doing. So there's nothing different. The code wasn't applied before and now it is. As far as water harvesting, that's kind of different because of mayor and council's involvement. So I don't know what they're going to do. They may open it up to a committee. I really don't know. I don't know. I just know it's going to be different. But I think that I will let you guys know if there is a committee formed or if they're wanting practitioners to participate in it. I think that happened before, but it was less than successful. So I'm hoping that this time, this go around, will be a little bit more, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Doesn't look like we do. So thank you very much, Anne, and thank you for your contact information.
Yeah, thank you for not being mean to me.
And just a reminder, my email is at the top of the chat. Send me an email if you want to be added to the ASLA list serve, at least the one that I'm keeping, and then keep an eye out for the invite for March. Thanks, everybody. Have a good, oh, is there one more question from Wheat?
Yeah, I think that was a clapping hand.
Oh, it's a clapping hand, you're right.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
All right, thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your week.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.